What's going on, hobby homies? My name is Vito and you're watching Trident and True Hobbies. And today we're going to take a beginner's look at using the airbrush. Airbrushes are a wonderful tool for any hobbyist to pick up. It can teach you new painting techniques or expedite the current project you're working on. In this video, we're going to cover a step-by-step guide on how to use the airbrush, how to clean it, what paints you can use, and other painting tips I've picked up over the years. The airbrush might seem daunting and complicated, but it really isn't. You might have some fears or reservations about starting, but I'm going to be here to break everything down for you so that you can feel confident in painting your very first miniature or project. Trust Cousin Vito, okay? There are several types of airbrushes. The one I'll be using is the dual action gravity fed airbrush. This is the type that most hobbyists use, but we are not limited to using. This particular one is an Iwata Eclipse HP CS airbrush with a 0.35mm needle. What I absolutely love about this airbrush is that it's a workhorse. You can use it for larger projects like basing models, or you can use it for that small, fine detail work. Now, what exactly does dual action gravity feed mean? It's super easy. Gravity feed means that you place paint in the top cup right over here, and gravity feeds it into the airbrush. Dual action pertains to the trigger. By pushing it down, you allow air to flow through, and pulling it back releases paint. The combination of these two actions atomizes the paint as the air comes through the bottom and the paint is pushed forward out of the airbrush, giving you that spray effect. Now that we know a little bit about how the airbrush works, let's talk about some of the equipment that you're going to need. These are the essential items that are going to make the airbrush work. Most sets will come with a variation of these three items: an airbrush, a hose, and a compressor. Some compressors are very different. Some are large, some are small, some will have tanks, while others are more box-shaped. Others will have gauges that can tell you the PSI or knobs that can help you adjust the air pressure. Now, the most important part of the airbrush is the needle. Do make sure not to bend or break the tip of the needle, as you'll find it very difficult to use. The airbrush can be taken apart rather simply. There are no tools needed, but you're going to want to do this when it's time to do a deep clean, especially after a long session of painting. Which brings us to our next point: which paints can you use? What's absolutely fantastic about the airbrush is how versatile it is in its application. Almost any paint can be used in it. You can use contrasts, washes, inks. There are even airbrush ready-made paints. Some metallics, like Scale 75, go beautifully through an airbrush. I'm personally a big fan of ProAcryl, but almost any brand and medium can work. To thin your paints, you're going to need an airbrush thinner and flow improver. The flow improver will aid in those mediums that are thicker bodied. You can use water in a pinch, but I'm not a fan, as water does have impurities that thinners don't. As for thinning your paints, you're looking for a particular consistency. Some people will say the consistency of melted ice cream or milk. Now, what does that mean? Honestly, it's a personal gauge that will come with time. Some thinners will actually have recommendations, saying 2 drops of thinner to 1 drop of paint, or 2 to 1. These are good guides, but don't stress over them. After all, this is meant to be a fun experience. But before we start having fun, let's talk about something really important, and that's safety. As you're painting, there's going to be a few minor safety tips to keep in mind. Because the airbrush atomizes the paint, this will cause the excess vapor or atoms of the paint to linger in the air. As the molecules are heavier than air, this stuff isn't really the best for us to breathe. Yeah, science! So I recommend painting in a well-ventilated area. You can do this near a window, or I've even seen some people purchase portable airbrush booths. I've installed this heavy-duty fan right above my painting station, which absorbs all the particulates that are in the area. Additionally, I recommend using a respirator or mask to further help filter out anything that's in the air. Unless you want to pick out different colors out of your nose, totally up to you. All right, enough about safety. Let's start using the airbrush. To start us off, I'm putting some Vallejo Surface Black Primer into the airbrush cup, followed up with just a few drops of thinner. I like to mix this up with an old brush, but there are plenty of people out there who mix them in separate containers and then pour it into the cup. If you're nervous about starting on a miniature or your final project, you can get a piece of paper or even cut out an old kit box that you have laying around. On the back side, you can practice drawing fine lines, thick lines, getting closer and farther, or even try spelling your name. On this side, I wanted to show you what happens if you hold down the trigger too long, apply too much pressure, are too close, or a combination of the three. When you're feeling more confident, you can flip over the card and practice filling in text, wording, or even the artwork. I want to talk about now probably the more daunting aspect of using an airbrush. I think that's the area that might be putting a lot of people off from actually buying or using an airbrush, and that's going to be cleaning the airbrush. I think the idea of the airbrush needing a lot of cleaning is holding a lot of people back from getting into it. But honestly, it doesn't need a lot of work. And once you get into the flow of things, it will be over in no time. I'm gonna give you a hobby hack that's gonna save you a ton of money. To do most of your cleaning in between color changes, I like to use window cleaner. It acts the same as airbrush cleaner for a fraction of the price. Also, I've seen a lot of people use these mini wire brushes and picks. I find them to be a little too abrasive, so I personally don't use them. Which is why I discovered these micro cotton brushes. They are fantastic for getting into those really hard areas that need a deep cleaning. Also, cotton swabs will be your best friend. I use them in between color changes and for deep cleaning. At the very end of my painting session is when I will use the airbrush cleaner to disassemble my airbrush and give it a good, thorough cleaning. Another hobby tip is to make sure to use needle lube. This will help the brush action of your airbrush and prevent your needle from seizing. Simply place a small dollop on the needle, run it in between your fingers, and you are ready to reassemble the airbrush. The final tool you're going to need is a dump pot. This is where you will purge all the excess paint, thinners, or other fluids that you will place in your airbrush. Now let's put it all together and finally paint something. Now we already have our model that's been built and cleaned, and we're going to be applying that Vallejo Black Surface Primer we already mentioned. As I'm applying the paint, I'm always allowing my trigger finger to move back and forth. So there's this delicate dance between air and paint. This allows me to control the amount of paint coming through while also allowing thin layers that I'm applying to dry, making room for new layers to be applied. And there we go. We have a model primed in black. I generally prime most of my models in black, but it really depends on what I'm working on. Next, I'm going to apply a zenithal highlight. This is where you apply a lighter color on the model from above to simulate a light source hitting it. I'll be spraying roughly from a 45-degree angle and trying to catch all the raised areas of the model. So this is what the model is going to be looking like after it's been given a zenithal highlight. It all depends on how contrasty you want to go. We could have gone a little lighter on the zenithal, but for the effect that we're trying to achieve, this is perfect. Next up, we are going to throw some color on it. We're going to use the Scale Color Fantasy in Games Mayhem Red. We're going to be applying this all over the model in thin coats, allowing the previous layers to dry. And that's it. It's that simple. This is just a small guide on how to use an airbrush and how to apply a base coat and zenithal highlights, but there is so much more that you can do with an airbrush. It's a fast way to get a base coat on larger models, and a really great way to paint small models or even large armies. But do you know what else is great? B-roll. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Do make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because next week I'm going to show you how to take everything that we just learned and bring it to the next level. As always, everyone, peace on the streets, and make sure to